morning, everybody. Nikki Burnett here. Today is Taste Life Nutrition Radio and Podcast streaming live on KUHSdenver.com. Today we're doing something just a little bit different, but I'm really excited about it. It will appeal to some, but not to everyone for sure, but that's okay, because that's what this is about. So, I was doing my promo about the show earlier, and, one of the things that dawned on me as I was starting to create, what I wanted this show to look like was that 5 years ago, so this is our 5th anniversary doing this show, and 5 years ago was January 2020, and everything was completely normal in my world, right, except for the fact that I was starting this show, which is something that I never thought that I would do because it scared the hell out of me. I was like, why would I do that? That's really scary stuff. But I did, and here we are. But the thing is, too, what kept coming to me when I wanted to understand what the show is about and what I wanted it to be, being a practitioner in the world of healthcare and being sort of a disruptive part, more disruptive world of healthcare, right? Functional medicine, functional nutrition is not the conventional, which is okay, right? I think it's important to consider that we need both, but it is a little bit more disruptive and, kind of, brings out some truth sometimes. Now, with that, we move forward a couple of months to March of 2020. March of 2020 was my birthday, which my birthday is coming up in a couple of days. So crazy that we're talking about this, but God's will is what it is. So anyway, that was when everything shut down. The world shut down. Everybody's like, what is going on? I was in Dallas, Texas, with my friends celebrating. We were supposed to go to a concert that got shut down. We celebrated my birthday, all of the things. And then so I think about, what has happened in that time from that birthday to today's birthday, 5 years. And I think that I'm not the only one who would say that nobody has ever expected things to transpire the way that they have. And so to me, there are, I like to see the positives in everything, but there are also a lot of negatives, lots and lots of negatives. One of those, losing family members. I've lost friends. I lost my own mother. And so this is what I decided to do. So anyway, my husband sent me a video that I thought was eye-opening. And so this video is by Dr. David Martin. It was a speech that he delivered. So this is, if you don't know David Martin, follow him, especially if this show is something that is of interest to you. But he delivered a speech at the European Parliament in Strasbourg, France. So this was September 13th of 2023. So it's a couple of years old, but it is, he's discussing the implications of the international health treaties. And so I think that this is a really important video. This is a really important topic, even if it's a couple of years old. And I think that it's worth putting out there into the world. And so that's what we want to do. I want to play the video. It's about 25 minutes long, and then when we finish that, we'll just talk about it a little bit, right? So, but what I didn't do is I didn't start the show with gratitude. Gratitude can change the world. I am so grateful for being mostly beyond the last 5 years. I think there have been a lot of lessons learned, maybe some lessons that needed to be learned. And sometimes that's a part of life, right? Growth can be really hard. But, so I'm also grateful for the gift of the sun and the beach. So we just got back from Mexico. So I was out for a couple of weeks, didn't do the show, and just spent some time in Mexico. And it was, not the entire 2 weeks. I wish I had, but got to spend a little bit of time there. And it was just amazingly beautiful. I had such a good time, so easy. Having a little R&R is, it's so good for the soul. And it was warm, and I just had, my husband and I had the best times, just the two of us, and completely relaxed, which was amazing. So I am grateful for God's gift of sun and beach, sun and sand, right? Okay, so we're going to start this video. I'm going to make sure that I do it all properly, hopefully, because sometimes I can go and mess things up a little bit when it comes to the technology piece of things, but here we go.
The live stream is waning, which means that if we just listen to my colleague Matthias, the best thing in the world would be to leave it to you, the people. Now it's up to you to share what clearly, based on the cavernous emptiness we see in all of these spaces, is only going to be heard if you share it. So it feels very appropriate that I should be the one with the quietest voice. But let's let that lion roar, shall we? I'm done talking about COVID, and I'm done talking about SARS-CoV-2, and I'm done for a very simple reason. For 110 years, we, the people of the world, have been lied to. We're a group of very small number of criminal industrial conspirators decided to subordinate the entirety of the human population for the purpose of their sinister plans to enrich themselves while impoverishing and killing the rest of humanity. And I'm done being polite. We've long passed polite. When the words acceptable death rate become part of an industrial norm, we have lost the plot of humanity. And that's not my words. Those were the words of the World Health Organization and of Pfizer and of Moderna when they were given the authorization to begin the process of killing human beings in the interest of advancing their goals. Next slide. And I'm also not going to sugarcoat this. This is a criminal cartel. We are acting as though there's some sort of redeemable quality somewhere in some esoteric layer that somehow or another the World Health Organization must have some salutatory benefit. Well, I'm going to tell you, since its formation in the 1940s, the World Health Organization has been nothing more than a criminal cartel that has a sole and singular intent. And I will show you the document that proves what I'm saying. This is not an allegation. This is actually provable by their own words in their own hand. And they use a four-step process to execute every one of their nefarious plans. They begin by planning an exercise, then they go to the business of funding that exercise, then they create the rationale for the thing that they're going to do, and then they deploy and profit from it. And in violation of 15 U.S. Code Section 19, which for those of you listening, coincidentally started with the Clayton Act in the same year that the World Health Organization in the United States, 1913, the same year the World Health Organization's progenitors also started. So I find it fascinating that we passed the Clayton Act in 1913, and we set in motion 110 years ago the criminal conspiracy, which we now call the World Health Organization. 110 years later. And in violation of TIFU, or TEFU, I don't even know how to say it, the TFEU, the treaty allegedly for the functioning of the European Union, which I think needs to now be called the Treaty for the Dysfunctional European Cabal, Article 101 unambiguously lays out the conditions that this was never a public health anything. It was racketeering for the purpose of instilling terror to adapt the behavior of a population. Period. That's what it was. That's what it always was. And we can come up with every theoretical argument we want to make about things, but the problem, even with the theory that we had an outbreak of something, is falsifiable for the data from Zurich that shows us that in the year of the death pandemic of the globe, life insurance companies paid $30 billion less in claims. Now, if there's a medical professional or a social professional or anybody else who wants to debate that we could develop a virus cunningly that could find out your bank account, your insurance policy statements, and whether you're paid up on your premiums, that's a big ask. It turns out that the data is unambiguous. We did not have a pandemic, we had genocide. And we need to call it what it is. Next slide. When I say we planned it, let's make sure we understand exactly the not so fine print of the fine print. And I want to call your attention first to the right-hand column of the slide. This is the 2011 data that the World Health Organization, the Wellcome Trust, PATH, and the Gates Foundation did on their wonderful worldwide program for a malaria vaccine for children under the age of 6 months of age. And in their clinical trial, it's helpful to point out that they murdered 66 children in the vaccine group and then cunningly used the term control for a control group in which they murdered 28 children. Now, the reason I said murdered and the reason why I use that term is because it's exactly what it was. Because it turns out that this control group was not a saline injection. It was not some sort of innocuous, innocent thing. It was actually a cocktail of other known pathogenic disease-carrying injections. The control group was known to kill people, and the experimental control group was actually theoretically maybe going to kill people. And what we did was we actually went ahead and murdered them all. And cunningly, under Article 5, Section 13, which I've put on this slide, I want you to understand why I said, at its formation in 1947, when the WHO was funded and founded, it was funded and founded by people intent to commit a crime because of their own language. Section 13 of Article 5 ends with the following statement: immunity from personal arrest or detention, blah, 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 immunity from legal process of every kind. Now, if you didn't intend to commit a crime, why would you need to give yourself permanent and absolute immunity from every form of prosecution, and its worse, even investigation for prosecution of every kind? People sit there and pretend, well, that's like diplomatic immunity. Do you realize this isn't even meeting the standard of diplomatic immunity? This is a criminal organization who set in motion their own law to protect themselves against crimes they knew they were going to commit. And when I say they knew they were going to commit, I mean they knew it. Because their first Director General, none other than Dr. René Sand, who happened to be in the hospitality of the Germans in Dachau in 1940 earlier, in 1947, mysteriously, with the largesse of the Rockefeller Foundation, was nominated to become the first Director General of the WHO. And within 5 short years, René Sand decided to authorize the real purpose of the WHO in writing by then Director General Dr. Brock Chisholm, who advocated for population control as its primary objective. Does that sound like public health to anyone in this room? This is not public health. This is the advancement of the same genocidal program that began with the Carnegie Foundation's funding of the eugenics office at Cold Spring Labs in the United States in 1913 under the philanthropy of Andrew Carnegie. People, stop fooling yourself. We debate the leaves on the tree of what we call this pandemic thing, but we're not going to the root. This was an organized crime, racketeering entity set up to give itself first absolute immunity and then execute its plans to make sure it controls who lives, who dies, and who gets any chance at life. And if you think that I am somehow inflating numbers, let me be unambiguous. Under every treatment of tax provision, if I were to tell you that there is an 88% controlling interest of any organization, you might conclude that that actually aggregates into a controlling interest. And it turns out that if we look at the foundation donations to the World Health Organization, 88% of those come from a single organization, the Gates Foundation. That constitutes a violation of every competitiveness law in Europe and every competitiveness law in the United States. This is absolutely not only not an independent, charitably funded donation, but more importantly, under the tax laws on both sides of the Atlantic, this constitutes directed donations which specifically are forbidden and do not have any place anywhere in the Charter of the World Health Organization or any of the UN-affiliated organizations. When I say this is a crime, I mean it's a tax crime, a racketeering crime, a money laundering crime, and now the crime of racketeering leading to murder and global terrorism. Next slide. I told you that the second thing, after they planned it, is they fund it. And why don't we use the criminals' language in their own words, because it's the best way to say it. When they actually planned the release of the use of a biologically modified chimera associated with the model derived from coronavirus, they actually said the following: to sustain the funding base beyond the crisis, we need to increase the public understanding for the needful medical countermeasures, such as a pan-influenza or pan-coronavirus vaccine. Now let me pause for just one moment and remind you that the crisis that they were speaking of was a crisis of diminishing funding. There was no health crisis. This was a crisis of their coffers were starting to run dry. That's the crisis. And let's read on. A key driver is the media, and the economics will follow the hype. We need to use that hype to our advantage to get to the real issues. Investors will respond if they see profit at the end of the process. That is officially the statement made by the conspiratorial cabal that by that time was the decade of vaccines put in motion in 2011 by the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board of the World Health Organization, and it was the funding base for Peter Daszak's partnership with the chimeric production of pathogens both in North Carolina and in Wuhan. So don't tell me that we have to do an investigation into where this came from. The criminals have admitted to it in their own words. Next slide. And now we get the fun one that no one in Congress is willing to address, which is the elephant in the room. On October the 21st, 2014, despite the multiple conversations between Senator Rand Paul and Anthony Fauci, where we've been told that Rand Paul has done everything he can to put Fauci on the ropes, he has had in his possession the letter that you see on the left. And it is the letter, conveniently on NIAID letterhead, sent to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which unambiguously states that during the gain-of-function moratorium, which, by the way, if we use the word moratorium, feels like that means you're supposed to stop. Why don't we go ahead and look at two pieces of this letter. First, the second bullet under Project 1, which, by the way, was not part of the original grant. This was to look at the novel functions of the virus pathogenesis in vivo. You know what that means? In living systems. The grant was supposed to be clinical simulations and models, but this grant was modified with this letter to say we were going to authorize gain-of-function research during the moratorium in living systems. And then we love the last paragraph of this letter, which conveniently says, as your grant is currently funded, this pause is voluntary. How many times have you met a voluntary moratorium? And the best part about it is that if we look at the very last line, or continue to conduct the applicable gain-of-function research until the end of the currently active budget period. But here comes the problem. You know who is supplying the budget? An indefinite term, unlimited amount contract from DARPA and from NIH. Isn't it convenient to have a perpetually funded project that needs to stop when the money runs out, when you find out that there is no point where the money runs out, because there is no end to the thing that has no end? And lest you think that I'm making an allegation, which I'm not, I'm making an accusation. Let's be clear. And there's a big difference. I'm not alleging anything. They actually went to the trouble of telling us that it was going to be the Wuhan virus that was going to get us. As you see on the right-hand side of the screen, published in 2016, March 14th of 2016, the SARS-like Wuhan Institute of Virology Virus 1, and I quote, is poised for human emergence. Does that sound like we're just surprised that something in Wuhan went a little haywire in December of 2019? Or does it feel like we were told, look at Wuhan, and look at coronavirus, and look at what we've been doing to manipulate coronavirus in Wuhan and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and lo and behold, we're going to go ahead and tell you that we're ready to release it in 2016. Next slide. We're almost done. And then they created it. Now, all of you know that I am criticized globally for my use of the term biological warfare. I do that because I am credentialed to do that. I happen to be, for the United States government, in the early part of the 2000s and the latter part of the 90s, a person who was sent around the world to look at the proliferation of biological and chemical weapons. I'm acutely familiar with the definition of what a biological warfare agent is in the 18 U.S. Code, the criminal code of violations of biological and chemical weapons. And so my assessment is in fact professional and right. And the reason for that is I'm the one credentialed to make that determination for the United States government for many years. That's why I say it. But let's pretend for the moment that I'm just a nut job. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. So why don't we look at what the criminals said themselves, shall we? In 2005, at a conference sponsored by DARPA and the MITRE Corporation, Ralph Baric, the architect of the lethal strand that has been injected into millions and billions of people's arms, that Ralph Baric was sponsored to present the following, and let's go ahead and use his words, presentation: synthetic coronaviruses, biohacking, bio-warfare enabling technologies. Does that sound like a public health distribution program? Does that sound like something that is accidentally misinterpreted to mean something else? Or does biological warfare enabling technology sound like not countermeasures or pandemic preparedness? It sounds to me like biological warfare enabling technologies. And the reason why I have that hunch is what followed was he received, next to his NIAID grants, non-competitive DARPA grants in matching funds for over $140 million of aggregate funding going into his and his related programs on synthetic biological warfare enabling technologies. So do I have a problem calling the injection a biological warfare enabling technology? Absolutely not, because that's what they called it. And we know that they knew they called it that on September 18th, 2019. Because on September 18th, 2019, the racketeering, co-conspiring cabal of interlocking directorates, also known as the World Health Organization, said that they were going to conduct an experience for the world that was going to be a rapidly spreading pandemic due to a lethal respiratory pathogen. The lethality in that statement is the problem. They didn't say we're going to maybe get a little bit of sniffles going around. They said we were going to actually have the promulgation of a deadly agent. And the stated reason, in September 2020, the progress indicator is that the world would accept a universal vaccine. Not, we'll look at other options of treatment. Not, We'll have a look at what might be early intervention, as Dr. McCullough has so clearly advocated for in many, many, many instances. Not that. We stated on September 18th, 2019, we were intending to kill. And we were intending to kill to create the fear that would drive people to accept something that without coercion, no one would have accepted. And that's published by the criminal racketeers. Next slide, and there's only 2 to go if you're following. Deploy and profit from it. We were told investors will respond if they see profit at the end of the process, and lo and behold, guess what they saw? Profit at the end of the process. 2022, $100 billion for Pfizer of public funds. Moderna, after lying to the Congress in October of 2020 when they were asked to actually verify whether NIAID was promoting an injection that would enrich NIAID, where Anthony Fauci and the entire team at NIH said that they had no financial interest in their recommendation, they receive a back payment royalty of $400 million for the first payment of the royalty. $400 million. More than any Institute of Health has ever received in a single payment for a single invention in the history of American medical research. And lo and behold, what do we receive after that? A request from the World Health Organization to expand its budget by 11% to make sure that the people who profited from it donate to it. And guess what they just did? They laundered the money right back. That's what they did. Next, and now you get the final slide. This is not a public health crime. This is actually not a constitutional crime. This is a criminal act done by a criminal institution established to enable criminal behavior since its foundation in 1947. That is what this is. And we should not be debating the merits of democracy or liberty or anything else, as irrational as that would be if we stood at a bank robbery and debated the merits of printing dollar bills. The problem is not the dollar bills, it's the bank robber. And the problem here is not health, and it's not public health, and it's not the suppression of information and the suppression of dissident views and the absolute unconscionable treatment of physicians around the world and academicians around the world who spoke out against this. That's not the crime. The crime is that we had criminal racketeers who conspired and developed a, quote, emergency. The same criminal racketeers planned, manufactured, and did all agency capture to make sure that you were told that you would use terms that they tell you to use. Vaccine, face mask, health, social distancing, none of which had ordinary use definition. So we just used them. Criminal racketeers price fixed with interlocking directorates where known competitors came together and fixed prices in direct collusion, in violation of both European Union standards and in violation of both the Sherman and the Clayton Act in the United States. These were crimes, it was organized crime, and we should treat it as such. Criminal racketeers publicly lied under oath. And this resulted in the death and destruction of liberty, and most importantly, the death and destruction of the integrity of well-meaning people who sit here today doing everything they can within their power to try to treat the calamities created by this catastrophe. I will not for a moment denigrate the multiple contributions of amazing academic and medical professionals who've tried desperately to step into the gap and stop the corrupt outcomes of these crimes. But I will, without doubt, say the following. Until we treat this as a criminal conspiracy of criminal racketeers resulting in global terrorism for the purpose of profiteering and murder, until we have that conversation, we're having the wrong conversation. Because we are not here to debate the merits of a modified agreement for a criminal racketeering organization. We are here to end the criminal organization itself. This is my call to every single person on this planet. Don't just limit the power of the WHO, destroy the WHO. Thank you very much.
All right. So, let's see if I can get this back to where we're supposed to be. Whoa. Escape, please. All right. So, that stinks. Anyway, sorry. I don't know where you had the video, Henry. Sorry. But my Facebook stopped. Anyway, so what I really want to do is I don't want to talk about the politics of all of this. It's not my world. It's not what I'm good at. And the intent also was not to bring about fear or incite fear. I think we're beyond that. We've already had plenty of fear that we have dealt with over the last several years, which is really frustrating because obviously that was the intent. So what I really want to talk about, though, is what I see on a day-to-day basis regarding people who are struggling with health and who are still fearful, and also our ability to advocate for ourselves, our ability to control our own health. And that's what was taken away from us with all of this, was the fear that, there was the fear that we would spread it, and the fear that we would kill our family members, and the fear that we were going to die and have all of these terrible, terrible problems. And so our ability to manage our own health, our own health care, our own families was taken away from us. And so obviously we can't go backwards, and I don't want to go backwards, but what I want to do is use this as what I hope and pray for is a lesson for everybody who's willing to take it in and use it as a lesson, right? Whatever you believe, we should have the ability to take care of ourselves and take care of our family and not have that taken away. And so for the purposes of learning from the past, knowing that it's it's my responsibility to take care of myself and my family, and not someone else's. And so what happens and what I see so often now is, I have my own practice. I also collaborate with physicians, and I see a multitude of patients who come to me. So many of them are coming to me, and they are either sick after getting COVID or after being vaccinated, right? Both of them are problematic and really hard on the immune system. And some people who are already ill or have some kind of chronic condition or immune deficiency, you put in a vaccine, and really a vaccine of any kind, but a vaccine like this that is so damaging on the body, as well as then of course COVID itself, which is super damaging on the body in so many ways, not just the respiratory system, but the cardiovascular system, our brain function. I mean, it is treacherous. I've had it at least once, maybe twice. And so I work really hard to make sure that my immune system is up to par. I've done spike protein detoxes because I want to ensure that my body is able to handle the impact of this disease and any other disease, right? Whatever. That's why it's my job to take care of myself, because I want to be able to get through these situations, right? This disease took out our elderly. It took out those who are unhealthy, they're immunocompromised, or they were obese, and it's still taking people out. I fully believe that to be the case. And so in practice, when I am working to help people through whatever their condition is, whether it was spawned by this or made worse by this, or, they're just, chronically ill anyway. This didn't make everybody chronically ill, obviously, but the goal is to look at what they're struggling with and how can we manage that, and how can we support the immune system, support the cardiovascular system, support brain function, and all of those things in order to mitigate the symptoms that it brings up, whether it's the vaccine or the disease itself. So I think that we have a responsibility to ourselves and to our families to advocate for ourselves and to not be driven by fear. And that's not always an easy thing to do. Believe me, I had plenty of fear. And it's a struggle when so often it's family members who are going against each other, right? It's friends who are going against each other. I dealt with that in my own family. My family was really angry that I did not go. That's not true. It's not entirely true. They were not happy that I would not get vaccinated. And so that's fine, but I wasn't going to get vaccinated. There was the fear around not being able to travel. There was the fear around spreading it. There was so much. And that, I think I heard that so often was, I don't want to not be able to travel. Well, I would rather live a full life and not be able to travel than not. And that's what happened to a lot of people. I fully believe it's what happened to my mom. But again, moving forward, my hope and my prayer is that we learn to take a look at where we are now. So take a look at yourself. I look at myself and I look at my family and I look at our health, and that's where it goes. If somebody comes to me and wants me to help them in their health, then that's my job, and that's what I'm going to do. But with myself, I'm going to do my best to ensure that I am managing my immune system, I'm managing my alcohol intake, I'm managing my toxic load, I'm managing my stress levels, which is not easy. And it's not easy for anyone, really. No, that's a lie. I've seen people who do it pretty well. I want to be one of those people. But you're managing your sleep. You're doing all of these things that are intended to create and support a robust immune system so you can manage things like this, right? And so I do that by, making sure that the food I bring into my home is good, healthy food. It's good grass-fed food, right? So we purchased a pig. We purchased a cow. I know that these are healthy animals and it's bringing health to me. And I watch what my husband does, but I also know that I can't control him, right? So I am not here to control him. I'm here to help him. We are partners in this, but not everybody has the same situation. I'm fully aware of that it can be really difficult when you're trying to manage kids, right? Making kids eat healthfully is not always the easiest thing to do. But it's important. It's really important to do to build a body that has the ability to handle these things and that optimizes. So, it's not about longevity of our bodies. It's about how well we live while we're here. And I really hope that we can take this as a lesson and move forward. And so, what's come out of it, which is fascinating to me and amazing. And, if we're going to look at the positives of it, what we're seeing now is a hardcore push on bringing health to our country and beyond, of course. So we have those who are now in office who their ultimate goal is to make sure our kids are growing up healthfully. There's a little bit of a side note, in the work that I'm currently doing, there's a lot of push for peptides, which is great. Peptides, I think, are pretty amazing. They're really amazing. They can really help with some really chronic issues that are just hard to manage. But what is also a peptide is the semaglutide, or the GLP-1 agonists. And so these are the new weight loss drugs. And so you've got the drugs, but then we've got the peptide form of the drug, right? So in saying this, I read a book. I'm going to tell you, because anybody who's thinking about this, I think you need to read this book. But it's called The Magic Pill, and it's by Johann Hari. It's a really good book. I have some differences in opinion with him on a few things, but that's okay. The ultimate goal of the book is to help people understand these GLP-1 agonists and how they're impacting the body, because it's not just about weight loss, and it's not long-term weight loss unless you're on these things long-term, right? And so this is another issue with COVID, is if you were obese and you had these multiple comorbidities, right? It was much, much harder on those people, and took a lot of those people out than those who did not have excessive weight. And so, we bring in these GLP-1 agonists, which, are they little miracle drugs? For some people, I mean, they have the ability to do some great things for people, but they also are showing that it has the potential of impacting thyroid health. Is it possibly pushing thyroid cancer? We don't really know yet, potentially. Is it also impacting our mental and emotional health? Can it push eating disorders? What's it going to do to our kids? They're pushing to have it indicated for young kids, I think as young as 6. And so we need to not take for granted the research that needs to be done when it comes to our own health and the decisions that we're making for ourselves and for our children. And so, again, I want to say this book, I listened to it, I didn't read it, or I would have brought it with me, but it's called The Magic Pill by Johann Hari. It's not very old, and it's a good listen, it's a great listen. I mean, I listened to several of his books, and he's so brutally honest about his own situation, and how he writes these books is based on his own situation. So I appreciate him for what he's doing, and appreciate that there are so many gray areas when we're looking at health, and it's important that I kind of already said this, but we don't take for granted that everything is a positive, right? We need to understand all sides of our health, the decisions that we're making, in order to make a good decision. And I mean, this is the stuff that I try to teach and preach and promote, and will talk my face off about, is knowledge is power. And when we don't have the knowledge, we can't make good decisions. I tend to probably over communicate when I'm speaking with my clients and my patients, because I literally want them to know everything that I'm thinking that's for their good or not, right? I want them to know, this is the good, this is the bad, this is what I'm seeing in your body. These are the implications, potentially, both good and bad. And then you take all of this information. You can take what I say, you can take whatever others say. Hopefully these people have it, they have their team of people they can go to, who they can trust. And then they can take the knowledge that they have and make decisions based on this knowledge. And, doing enough of this, enough of the investigation, at least to the best of your ability, by people who are the experts, you can then become an expert in your own body, right? Not everybody's going to be a nutrition expert, or a functional medicine doctor, or an immunologist, or you name it, an accountant, right? Not everybody's going to be an expert, but you can become an expert in your body, and in your family, and in your area. And that's what I want for people, is why labs are so amazing, because it can help us understand what your body's trying to tell you when we can't quite figure it out. We have this situation where we might have these symptoms going on, and we don't know why. And so if we run the labs, if we do the research, if we talk to our team, we can start to decipher, this is what my body's doing, this is what it's telling me, this is what we need to do to help it. And my goal is, when I'm talking with people, is everything that I'm telling them, everything that I'm teaching them, everything that I'm showing them, is opening them up to what their body's telling them, so they can take this information, learn to listen to it, and learn to listen to their bodies, and take that for the rest of their lives. And also share it with their families. Their families can take it for the rest of their lives, right? And, this goes back to the beauty of epigenetics, because the more we teach, the more we learn, the more we know about ourselves, the more we're going to be able to have the information to pass it on for generations, right? What we have done with COVID and the vaccines is generational. And I was going to say I'm a little frightened of what that means, but you can't be frightened, because it is what it is. So we just move forward in all that's to come and learn from it. And that's all we can do. But we can still take the time to support our bodies. I was talking to a client, I think it was just yesterday, was asking me about spike protein detoxes. It's a thing. And this is not just me. This is from the doctors. Dr. McCullough, that was mentioned by Dr. Martin. He talks about the spike protein detoxes. These things can, run around the body and be super problematic. So what can we do to start to break those spike proteins down so they're not creating a problem for us? And are they being passed on? I don't know. I have no idea. So, a lot of these things, though, when we talk about epigenetics, what we know is drugs change our epigenome. So if you haven't watched before, let me kind of back up and talk a little bit about epigenetics. Epigenetics are locations that live on top of our genes that have the ability to control the expression of genes. So what does that mean? If I have potential for cardiovascular disease, if I have potential for diabetes or autoimmune disease, the potential is there, but it doesn't have to express. The epigenome is controlled by lifestyle, right? So it's controlled by food, it's controlled by stress, or too much or too little, and movement and sleep and relationships and all of the environment and toxins and toxic burden. So all of these things impact our epigenome, which controls gene expression. So we know, when we know this, that means we know, and we do know because it's studied, drugs impact our epigenome. I was at a conference, it was a genetic conference, it was quite a few years ago at this point, but it was a pharmacist who was on talking about how she became a pharmacist to help help all she can. That's why people move into any part of healthcare, is because they want to help, right? You have the knowledge, you have the will to want to learn, and then also to educate and to help. And her husband became ill, and all she knew was to give the drugs, and he became sicker and sicker and sicker. Well, whatever it was that turned her on to the epigenome, she started to realize that the drugs were creating more problems for him. That's not always the case. I'm not bashing drugs, but it took her to a place where she began to research the impact that certain drugs have on the epigenome. And so these are things that we can see. And so she was able to, change him by, changing his epigenome, which means you look at lifestyle, you look at food, you look at, nutrition and micronutrients and all of these things to help bring somebody back to health. Sometimes it takes drugs. Sometimes it takes supplements. Sometimes it takes grounding and being in the sun, and many, many things all together to get out of this place of chronic illness. But knowing that drugs impact our epigenome is passed on for generations, I think it's important that we, in making our decisions and advocating for our own health and the health of our kids, that it's important for us to keep that in mind as we are making the determination, is this the drug that my kiddo needs? Is this the drug that I need? and what's going to be the implication, and is it, it's weighing your options and weighing the pros and the cons on whether it's a yes or a no. And sometimes it's a yes, a lot of times it's a no. But even things, ibuprofen is not a benign drug. It can be really problematic. I know people who take it, just handfuls of it every day. I have a client right now who we just talked a couple of days ago, and he's like, I know that this is terrible, but I've got to be able to get through my day. So we're working on uncovering the root cause of his condition, so we can start to decrease the amount of drugs that he's taking and help him to get beyond some of what he's struggling with. This is not easy stuff, right? I would never say that I've never taken a drug, right? But it certainly is when I have to take anything that is outside of what comes from, God. I think about what is the implication of this and what's going to happen. And so kind of coming full circle with all of this, I think my prayer is for any of you who are watching and are interested in boosters and other drugs, other vaccines, is that you really consider the pros and the cons, the benefits and certainly the non-benefits, because I think it's really important, especially when some of these things are coming to light with something like the COVID vaccine. But really it's important for all of them. But, my job is not to instill fear. My job is not to tell anybody what to do. My job is to do my best to give the information so you can make the best decision for you. We may not always agree, but that's life. That's who we are, and that's okay. I will give the information, and then you go and you do what you do, right? So that's how I'm with my clients and my patients every day. And people make decisions that I probably wouldn't decide to do all the time, but that's okay, right? So I have control of me, and that's all I have control of. So I'll take that, and I think that keeping that in mind as we move forward, in relationships, and my hope is that those who were at odds during this whole pandemic hopefully have come back together, because it is and was so sadly divisive with family and with friends and things. I believe fully intentionally, but we have to keep in mind in everything that we do that I'm the only one that I have control of. I can't change other people, and I don't want to change other people. That responsibility is way too much for me. So my responsibility is me, and that's about it. And then to do my best to take care of my family. So anyway, I don't want to just, beat on this drum, except I think that what we lost for a while is some critical thinking, and there's no blame there because there's a lot of fear there. One of the things that I'm gonna be like brutally honest about all of this is I had enough fear of my own thinking, is this something that I should do? Should I get vaccinated? My mom is sick. Should I get vaccinated for her, right? The thoughts were there. I have my sweet husband who was adamant. He was like, this is not something that we need to do. And I'm grateful for him because he was, straight in line with, this is not something that we need to do. And so I didn't, and I wonder sometimes what would have happened had it not been for him. And that's life, that's, we are all influenced by so many different things, and that's the way that it goes. I'm just really grateful for him and the conversations that we had around this. And we had a lot of conversations around it, whether it was something that should be done or not. But in the end, we didn't. We decided against it, and my heart breaks for those who regret the decisions that they made, but that's okay. Again, you can't go backwards. We can only move forward and continue to be responsible for ourselves, think critically, try not to live in fear, right? There's enough to be fearful of. Just, in my world, in my mind, God's got this. You try to lean on that and lean on that faith and, just live in the present too. I'm living for today. I'm living to do my best to learn and to research and now help those who have been injured and help those who maybe even have not been injured but still are, critically ill, and trying to figure out what's going on, because it's not always an easy place to be, as many of you know. So anyway, I plan to post this link. This was on X. You'll see it all over X. There are lots of these videos different all over the place. I think Dr. David Martin is obviously an incredibly smart, intellectual, amazing person to follow. I've not known about him for long, so of course I don't know him, but I think that he's someone who is worthwhile for sure. So I'm going to post the link in all of the comments and all of the places. I'm happy to answer questions if I can, right? So the politics of all of this is not my thing, but the health and the wellness piece of it is. So I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you next week, Thursday, 10 a.m. Mountain Time, streaming live on the one and only KUHSdenver.com. Thanks.